Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. IRS reminds taxpayers living and working abroad of June 15th deadline. IR 2021-122, June 2nd, 2021, Washington. The Internal Revenue Service today reminded taxpayers living and working outside the United States that they must file their 2020 federal income tax return by Tuesday, June 15th. This deadline applies to both U.S. citizens and resident aliens abroad. There's a link to that if you want more information about that, including those with dual citizenship. Just as most taxpayers in the United States are required to timely file their tax returns with the IRS, those living and working in another country are also required to file. An automatic 2-month deadline extension is normally granted for those overseas, and in 2021, that date is still June 15th, even though the normal income tax filing deadline was extended a month from April 15th to May 17th. So they extended from April the 15th to May 17th, but they're keeping the extension deadline, the 2-month deadline extension, normally granted for those overseas, and in 2021, that date still is the June 15th. So benefits and qualifications. An income tax filing requirement generally applies even if a taxpayer qualifies for tax benefits, such as the Foreign Earned Income Exclusion or the Foreign Tax Credit. There's links to those items here if you want more information about them, which substantially reduce or eliminates U.S. tax liability. So even if you have those components, the IRS typically, you may still need to file the tax return. So if you are in a situation where you have a foreign earned income exclusion or the foreign tax credit, you might want to take a look at those regulations and rules to make sure you're in compliance with the tax laws. So these tax benefits are only available if an eligible taxpayer files a U.S. income tax return. A taxpayer qualifies for the special June 15th filing deadline if both their tax home and abode are outside the United States and Puerto Rico. Those serving in the military outside the U.S. and Puerto Rico on the regular due date for their tax return also qualify for the extension to June 15th. IRS recommends attaching a statement if one of these two situations apply. Reporting required for foreign accounts and assets. Federal law requires U.S. citizens and resident aliens to report any worldwide income, including income from foreign trusts and foreign bank and security accounts. In most cases, affected taxpayers need to complete and attach Schedule B, there's a link to that here, to their tax return. Part 3 of Schedule B asks about existence of foreign accounts such as bank and securities accounts and usually requires U.S. citizens to report the country in which each account is located. In addition, certain taxpayers may also have to complete and attach to their return Form 8938 Statement of Foreign Financial Assets. There's a link to that here. Generally, U.S. citizens, resident aliens, and certain non-resident aliens must report specific foreign financial assets on this form if the aggregate value of those assets exceeds certain thresholds. See the instructions for this form for details. Foreign accounts reporting deadline. Separate from reporting specified foreign financial assets on their tax return, taxpayers with an interest in or signature or other authority over foreign financial accounts whose aggregate value exceeds $10,000 at any time during 2020 must file electronically with the Treasury Department a Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, the FINCEN, Form 114, Report of Foreign Bank and Financial Accounts, the FBAR. There's a link to that here. Because of this threshold, the IRS encourages taxpayers with foreign assets, even relatively small ones, to check if this filing requirement applies to them. So the IRS wants to know about those foreign accounts, so you can take a look at this form and the instructions for it for more detail. The form is only available through the BSA e-filing system website. There's a link to that website and that system here. The deadline for filing the annual report of foreign bank and financial accounts, the FBAR, there's a link to that here, was April 15, 2021, but FINCEN is granted filers who missed the original deadline an automatic extension until October 15, 2021 to file the FBAR. there is no need to request this extension. Report in U.S. dollars. Any income received or deductible expenses paid in foreign currency must be reported on a U.S. tax return in U.S. dollars. So the U.S. tax return needs to be generally in U.S. tax dollar denominations for the dollar. So likewise, any tax payments must be made in U.S. dollars. Both FINCEN Form 114 and IRS Form 8938 require the use of a December 31st exchange rate for all transactions, regardless of the actual exchange rate on the date of the transaction. So they're looking for the exchange rate. When you're trying to convert this thing to the dollars, of course, then you need an exchange rate. And the question is, well, what date do I use? Do I use the date of the transaction? It looks like they're saying no here. They want the date of December 31st generally. So generally, the IRS accepts only posted exchange rate that is used consistently. For more information on exchange rates, you can see the foreign currency and currency exchange rates. So if that's an issue, significant issue to you, then take a look at the link here. There'll be a link to this in the description so you can find this stuff. Expatriate reporting. Taxpayers who relinquished their U.S. citizenship or ceased to be lawful permanent residents of the United States during 2020 must file a dual status alien. There's a link to that here, tax return, and attached Form 8854, initial and annual expatriation statement. There's a link to that here. A copy of the Form 8854 must also be filed with the Internal Revenue Service 3651S IH35MS4301 AUSC, Austin, Texas, and so on. There'll be a link to this here so you can take a look at that in more detail. By the due date of the tax return, including extensions. See the instructions for this form and Notice 2009-85. There's a link to that here. Guidance for expatriates under Section 877A for further details. More time is available. Extra time is available for those who cannot meet the June 15th deadline. Individual taxpayers who need additional time to file can request a filing extension to October 15th. So they have that same kind of extension that you could still file for up until your tax deadline, it looks like, by printing and mailing Form 4868, application for automatic extension of time to file U.S. individual income tax return. There's a link to that here. The IRS can't process extension requests filed electronically after May 17, 2021. This is kind of funny because you're trying to get everything to be done electronically now, but if you didn't file the extension or by the normal deadline, then now they're saying that you basically have to use the paper file for the extension if you fall into this category. There doesn't look like they have the electronic filing that you could do with the software. So you need to, it's pretty easy to do. You can find the form here, Form 4868, to get the extension filled out. Remember, two things you want to make sure you're looking at: the amount of the payment and the filing deadline being kind of separate types of things you want to keep in your mind. Find out where to mail the form. There's a link to that here. Businesses that need additional time to file income tax returns must file Form 7004, application for automatic extension of time to file certain business income tax information and other returns. There's a link to that here. Combat zone extensions. Members of the military qualify for the additional extension of at least 180 days. There's a link to that here to file and pay taxes if either of the following situations apply. So they serve in a combat zone, or they have qualifying service outside of a combat zone, or they serve on deployment outside the United States away from their permanent duty station while participating in a contingency operation. This is a military operation that is designated by the Secretary of Defense or results in calling members of the uniformed services to active duty or retains them on active duty during a war or national emergency declared by the President or Congress. So if you are in the military and fall into these categories, including being in a combat zone, the IRS is gracious enough to extend for a little while the reporting requirements for your taxes. So deadlines are also extended for individuals serving in combat zone or a contingency operation in support of the armed forces. There's a link to that here. This applies to Red Cross personnel, accredited correspondents, and civilian personnel acting under their direction of the armed forces in support of those forces. So spouses of individuals who served in a combat zone or contingency operations are generally entitled to the same deadline extension with some exceptions. Exceptions, details, and more military tax information is available in IRS Publication 3 Armed Forces Tax Guide. There's a link to that here. Visit irs.gov for tax information. Tax help and filing information is available anytime on irs.gov. Notice what they're not saying. They're not saying, please call us. They're not saying to call them because they don't want to be called, I don't think, like most companies at these points. So they're trying to get everything on their IRS website, which can be found on irs.gov, irs.gov. The IRS website offers a variety of online tools to help taxpayers answer common tax questions. For example, taxpayers can search the interactive tax assistance tax topics. There's a link to that. And frequently asked questions. There's a link to that to get answers to common questions. irs.gov/payments. There's a link to that. Provides information on electronic payment options. Other resources down below, we have About Publication 54, Tax Guide for U.S. Citizens and Resident Aliens Abroad, and About Publication 519, U.S. Tax Guide for Aliens. There's links to those items here. There'll be a link to this in the description.